In Ukraine, the death toll is rising now in what has become one of the deadliest single attacks of this entire war. At least 40 people were killed when a Russian missile, just take a look at this video, it just really obliterated huge portions of an apartment complex in Dnipro. And dozens of people are still missing right now. Fred Pleiken is there for us. He joins us at this hour. Fred, what's going on there right now?
Hi there, Kate. And first of all, you're absolutely right. I mean, the magnitude of the destruction here is just absolutely incredible. I'm going to get it out of your way so you can see what we're seeing right now, which is, first of all, this gaping hole where large parts of this building used to be. But then you can really see how those rescue and recovery efforts and the cleanup effort are still going on. And officially, the Ukrainians say that this is still a search and rescue effort. But of course, they also acknowledge that by the second, the chances of finding anybody alive in what you see there in front of you really is dwindling and is really going towards zero. And the amount of people who were killed in this incident, they have continued to rise throughout the course of the day. Right now, we do stand at 40 killed. The Russians have come out, Kate, and they have claimed that they were not behind this strike. They say that this was a stray Ukrainian anti-air missile that hit this building. The Ukrainians obviously not having any of that. They say that they tracked the missile that was fired by the Russians from the Sea of Azov all the way to here where it impacted. And they say it was a Kh-22 cruise missile, which is a missile that is normally used, that is designed to destroy aircraft carriers. That is the missile that they say hit this building. And obviously, when a missile like that hits a building like this, you have the kind of destruction that you see there before your very eyes right now. And I can tell you, being on the ground here, seeing some of the people who are from this area, seeing some of the relatives, there's absolute grief and anger here on the ground from a lot of people. Obviously, many people cursing the Russians after this incident, but certainly the people that we're speaking to also saying they are not going to be brought down by what happened here just a couple of days ago. Kate.
Yeah, the resolve still to continue. Thank you so much. Fred Pleiken's there for us. We're going to continue to watch as this, they say, is still a search and rescue effort. Joining me now for more on this is retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. General, thanks for being here. What do you see in this really devastating attack on this apartment complex?
Well, Kay, let's first talk about whether this is a Russian missile or an air defense missile. It is the former, not the latter. It doesn't take an expert to determine that that was literally hundreds of pounds of explosives in a missile that contributed to that building falling. An air defense missile does not have that. So it's another instance of Russia just flat out lying. Now, I won't get too geeky on air, but this is an issue of a strategy of attrition on Russia's approach. In warfare, there's strategies of attrition where you try and exhaust the enemy, wear down the enemy, and bring different things to bear. Annihilation is where you try and outmaneuver the enemy, get them in a position where you can attack them and force a decision on the part of the other government to surrender. But the difference here is Russia is using a strategy of attrition not against the Ukrainian military force, but against the civilian force in an attempt to make President Zelensky have a lack of will to continue this fight. It's not working, as you just said. There's more resilience now in Ukraine than there's ever been. But unfortunately, this is going to continue.
You know, it's interesting, General, because the former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, he was on this morning and he spoke to something similar of what you're just talking about, kind of what this says about the war. He also talked about the war as being, I believe the word that he used is when you look at it being in a stalemate right now. And it makes me wonder, how does Ukraine break out of this stalemate moment? What can be done? What needs to be done?
Yeah, well, I don't agree with Secretary Esper on that. I don't think we're in a stalemate. There are certainly massive struggles going on in Kherson, in the Donbass, and it's a difference in approach, like I just said, in strategy between Russia trying to affect the Ukrainian people, while Ukraine's army is trying to affect the Russian army and get them out of the country. That's a strategy of attrition, forced decisions, because you are defeating the security force of the enemy. So this is certainly not a stalemate. But what needs to happen, unfortunately, a couple things. Russia has to run out of ammunition, which I don't see happening anytime soon. There's certainly indicators that they have less and less ballistic missiles to fire. But in this case, I mean, as an example, this weekend, those Kh-22 missiles that Fred was just talking about, indicators are there's about 50 of them as part of their Black Sea fleet that Russia can fire. They allegedly fired about 14 this weekend. So you still have almost 3/4 of the ones left on ships and submarines in the Black Sea, as well as coming by air. So it's going to continue, but what has to happen with Ukraine is they have to get an improvement in their maneuver force to continue to conduct attacks and offensives against the Russians' military and continue to drive them out of the country. That's what you see. It is somewhat of a stalemate between types of strategies, but I believe that Ukraine will have the power to continue their counteroffensives.
Thank you for coming in, General. I really appreciate it.
Gabrielis Landesbergis is the Foreign Minister of Lithuania. He joins me now from the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I will ask you to just give us a sense of what it is that you will be addressing the audience there with, what your message is likely to be at this stage. So do you believe some countries are trying to stall sending weapons to Ukraine? And if so, what do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, I think that we can clearly see that the events in Ukraine, the most horrible events, make us send the weapons that Ukrainians need. So at first it was attack on Kiev, then we sent javelins and stingers, then it was Bucha and Irpin, when we started sending HIMARS, and now obviously we are seeing Dnipro, and now the debate about the tanks is finally getting some fuel. I don't think that's the right attitude. Honestly, I don't think that Ukrainian civilians should be paying with their lives in order to get the weapons that they need. I think we have to be way more serious about how do we see this war ending. And it has to end in Ukraine by Ukrainians winning the territories that are now currently under Russian occupation. And for that, most of all, they need weaponry, and all kinds of weaponry. And first and foremost, it's tanks. Main battle tanks. Germany has them, Britain has them, United States has them, and also long-range rockets that could be used in order to push Russian troops out of the occupied territories.
You talk to enough of your sort of colleagues around Europe to know what the current thinking is. Do you believe we're entering a new phase in this war? Do others in Europe agree? And if so, do you believe the Ukrainians will get what they want at this point? I know you're suggesting they should, but what are they likely to get? And what's holding up the delivery of further military hardware?
Well, I think that basically the discussion in the West is still about the end of the war. And there are those who believe that maybe a frozen conflict would be suited better, which I completely disagree with that notion. But this notion, this thinking is, I think, that the main obstacle for some countries to send for sending the weapons that Ukrainians need. And indeed, it took a very long time, almost a year now, to get to the point where we actually are discussing sending tanks. And honestly, I would not be extremely surprised if the tank debate would be productive, in the sense that the Ukrainians would get their hands on the tanks. I think that we need to make sure that every country that's supporting Ukraine would get to the point and agree on the final point to how this war should end. That we all need to agree on the fact that Ukraine needs to win the war, needs to get Russia out of its territories if we want European continent to be safe again. And if we want the global security order to get back into what it was before. And for that, Russia needs to lose. And for that, we have to imagine and understand that Ukraine is actually still fighting against a superior force. Therefore, there is no way we can leave them with where they are now and with the weapons that they currently have.
The Polish Prime Minister today calling on the Germans to do more, and I quote him here, to supply all sorts of weapons to Ukraine. Do you believe the Germans should be doing more?
Well, honestly, yes, I concur that there are machinery, there are weapons that industrial Western powers such as Germany, France, and others can still deliver to Ukraine. But there's also a second thing in this story, is that a lot of countries have already procured German-made tanks. Among those is Finland and some other Nordic countries and South European countries, and they're willing to send the tanks to Ukraine. So far, they have not got a green light from Berlin. And I truly, truly hope that this might change as well. And that would reduce the pressure on Germany itself, meaning that maybe they cannot send all the tanks that Ukraine need currently. But with partners that have German tanks, it would be a substantial help to Ukraine.